Yep.
Go.
Nice.
Welcome, everyone. We will get started in just a few moments so we can allow everyone to get signed in. Welcome, and thank you for being here today. Kat, if you'd just like to let us know when you'd like us to get started.
I think we've got a pretty good quorum here if you guys would like to get started. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
sounds good. Well, thank you, Kat. Well, welcome everyone to our discussion, and thank you for joining us today for a conversation that's not only important, but extremely timely. Building a future we can afford, a national conversation on housing solutions. And this webinar is powered by Equity Angels. My name is Burrell-VanWormer, and I will serve as your moderator today. The American dream shouldn't come at the cost of financial anxiety. But a recent survey found that 68% of Americans report housing costs are causing financial strain. Our conversation today about affordable housing solutions will explore the challenges and opportunities across the country. And our panelists will share innovative approaches and market insights from coast to coast. Throughout our conversation, please share questions or comments in the chat section, and we will have time to get to them a little bit later today. Let's meet our panelists. We have Nikki Beauchamp, who is an industry leader with a unique global perspective based in New York City, where she's an associate broker with Sotheby's and is a go-to resource with all things New York. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We have Chip Ahlswede, who is the Vice President of External Affairs for the Apartment Association of Orange County, California. Chip's experience spans regulatory and policy insights, in addition to a focus on the multifamily impact of housing solutions, as well as residential. Chip is a highly sought-after expert in understanding how legislative priorities drive change in housing. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And next, we have Texas well represented today with both Daniel Ware, who's the Chief Revenue Officer, and Lawrence Dean, the CEO with Community Builder Advisory Services. Together, they provide high-quality housing market data to the home builder community in Texas and beyond. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kenya. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. We've got a lot to cover in a very little bit of time today. So here's a question for everyone. What are the biggest trends you're seeing in affordable housing solutions across the board in the United States and or in your local markets? Who'd like to kick us off?
I'll say out here in California, one of the biggest trends, and I'm not sure that it's the right or complete solution, we talked a little bit beforehand, is the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs as they're known, which is an opportunity where you can put more units on a property. In California, we've got a couple of different bills that got passed through our legislature that allows for additional units or higher density units on certain properties in proximity to transit or buses or any of those kinds of things. And cities have really jumped on wanting to include them. We have a thing out here in California called our housing element, which is something you have to submit to the state every year or every 8 years, saying where you're going to build housing. And lots and lots of cities are including ADUs as a massive step towards not just new housing, but affordable housing. I think some of them are a little overzealous in their estimates, and we've sort of seen that play out a little bit, but it is probably the biggest trend right now. I think there are better solutions or more solutions we can follow, but that is the biggest one we're seeing out here.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting, the popularity of the ADUs seems like it's resurging in different markets. I have colleagues in Australia, they call them granny flats, and it seems to be a little more common overseas, but I think we are starting to look for as many solutions as possible to close that gap with affordability. Anyone else want to talk about what they're seeing in their local market?
Yeah, certainly, Kenya. We're in Texas and specifically in Houston. On the national stage, Texas remains, comparatively affordable relative to many other markets. And within Texas, Houston is among the more affordable large metros, but affordability is relative. Our incomes also on the whole aren't going to be as high as you'll see in New York City or in Orange County. And so if we are affordability challenged in that regard, and things we're seeing, in some of the other markets in Texas, most notably Austin, we're seeing an increase in ADU activity. We have not observed so much of it yet here in the Houston market, but I would anticipate that we will. We work a lot in the new home builder, production builder, kind of suburban development space, for sale development space, and we're seeing, and this has been over the last few years, and I think we're going to see more of it, more often. Large volume home builders offering floor plans that, in the context of a large single family home, contain a 1-bedroom apartment separate as a casita or something to the side, not truly affordable, but making it incrementally more affordable by offering multi-generational living.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up, that intergenerational living is starting to really take off because you have parents that may want to age in place. And so there's a whole new conversation around the intergenerational piece, the affordability piece. It's so nuanced, and it's good to understand. You say affordability is really relative, right? Based on our income. So thank you for sharing that. Well, let's go ahead and take this conversation to the West Coast. And we're going to go back to you, Chip. How are California's housing pressures impacting the affordability of multifamily housing? And there's a second part to this. What strategies could make multifamily units more affordable in your market?
That's a great question. It's something we struggle with a lot out here. But I think if you take a step back from just our standard view of California and take a look at the reality of our state, we've got a lot of opportunity to really shift how things are happening out here. On the affordability side, everybody sees California as built out. That's what they always say. And as a result, you've got lots of infill development in established communities that are bringing new housing opportunities. We're seeing things that don't look like the West Coast, a lot of walk-ups in 3- and 4-story condos or things like that. And I think that's a great way that we're trying to get there. But I was at a presentation by a property management company 2 days ago. And they showed a stat that I had never seen before. And that was there are 40 million people roughly in California. Half of them live in Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, and what we call the Inland Empire, which is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. If you were to look at a map, that's like the bottom 10% of the state. So we've got a whole huge element of the state well above us that's much more sparsely populated. So I think if we were to start taking a look at some of those cities that are out there that are maybe have the opportunity to grow, some cities you may have heard of like Bakersfield, Fresno, Salinas, all of these places that are just on the outsides, but have real good access to intermodal transit. So there's opportunity for jobs there, distribution jobs, cities that have the same access to all the resources of Silicon Valley, so that maybe some of those tech startups could move to some of these different areas, and incredible education all around. You've got all the makings of a great community all over the state, but we're not building those out. Part of it's a function of desirability and historical impressions, but a lot of people like to make fun of places like Iowa. I've been to Des Moines, and I'll tell you, I think it's one of the coolest cities I've ever been around. So it's really about what you make of it. So if we just start shifting and finding these communities that we can build out and start growing more, I'm jealous of you, Nikki, taking a look at the East Coast. You guys have great cities back to back to back to back. I mean, you fly into Washington, D.C., in an hour, you're in Philadelphia on the train, obviously. Another hour, hour and a half, you're in New York. Another 2 hours beyond that, you're in Boston. We don't have that here. I mean, we've got LA and San Diego, and then it's 6 hours up to San Francisco or Sacramento. It's 4 hours out to Las Vegas, 6 to Phoenix by car, and train isn't even an option. So if we were to start building that same similar infrastructure on the West Coast, I think we'd see a lot of that affordability be able to come down as we're expanding out our reach. And for everybody that's concerned how much land we use out here, between 7 and 11% of California has been developed on. 52% of it is publicly owned. That means 47% of the land out there is touching or is available to be something. And 94% of people in California live in urban areas. So if you just take those basic data, that number tells you there's opportunity if we just stop looking the way we've always looked.
Chip,
That's-
you said, I'm sorry, I just want
Go
to jump
ahead.
in. Chip, you said something that really caught my attention. You said desirability.
Yeah,
And I think about, what builders have done here in Houston to try to somewhat retrain the market. And I say that in the context of bringing my son to drop him off to college his freshman year. And I saw what his dorm room looked like, and I compared it to the dorm room that I had, when I went to school. So I think it's the appetite of the market, then versus now. My first home didn't have it wasn't so amenitized. It didn't have, the crown moldings and the granite countertops. And that's what, that's what my son had in college, his freshman year, in the dorm. And so, I think, it is retraining the market a little bit. And I think, in my opinion, the builders in Houston, we actually just recently ran some analysis of the top, 60, 65 builders here in the Houston market. And we were actually surprised at some of the average sale prices that were achieved by some of the larger builders in this market, actually in the country. And that, what that tells us is, not only are they able to reach some of these smaller price points by, utilizing, municipal utilities districts and smaller lot sizes, but smaller homes. There's an element of, retraining the appetite of the market slowly and pulling back on some of those, shiny things to, fill a need,
No, truly. And that, that comment may be much more relevant here in the middle of the country in Texas than it is in Manhattan, denser markets on the coast. But, there may be some truth definitely to that as well, even in the denser, highly priced markets.
Well, I
Absolutely.
think that was really interesting is that two things. Affordability is relative, right? And in theory, in order for something to be affordable, whether it's rental or home ownership, it should be at approximately a third of your gross annual income. And that's the problem that we have now, which is why this is really not just a problem for a particular class per se.
Right.
It really hits all income levels because that cost has increased. And you've commented about, the granite countertops in your son's dorm room. I think about, first New York City apartments and the New York City apartments. And I grew up here in New York. So I remember the apartments that I saw as people's first apartments. And when people are coming in today, now that I'm in real estate, for 20 some odd years, the expectations of, well, I need a granite countertop, I need a dishwasher. And it's you are just starting out of college, or it's your first home. Your first home is not your forever home. There is a process of moving through and having different finishes and different space and different amenities. And in some ways, this environment that we've been in for the last 10, 15 years with design and HGTV and social media has created this image that everything has to be perfect right out of the bat. And there is such a thing as this is your first home. It's not going to be necessarily your forever home, but this is where you start, and then you adjust hopefully accordingly along the way.
I love that because everyone's talking about shifting your mindset. And I think shifting your mindset really helps to level set expectations. And to your point, it's your first home, not your forever home. So I do like the idea of really helping to change the narrative when it comes to what's available, what's affordable, and what actually makes sense in your marketplace. Now, before we leave the West Coast, I've got one more question for Chip.
sure.
Love to understand, how have state legislative priorities impacted the broader affordability conversation? And how have you and the Apartment Association been able to be an advocate for consumers in California?
That's a great question. And in California, it's an uphill battle. I believe most elected officials, right or left, are there trying to do the right thing. And they have their own natural set of constituencies that they listen to. But in doing that, sometimes they forget some of the other elements. So I mentioned some of the things that we've done here, like the bills that have passed to make ADUs more available, and the fact that some cities have jumped on top of that. Well, then we've also got some issues where we've got completely conflicting priorities. Here we've got a series of bills giving you almost by right opportunities to develop. And then we will have, no, we have to conserve everything that exists, or put new different animals, plants, what have you, on protective lists, which in many cases are very, very valuable. However, it's an all or none experience. One of the areas in our more affordable area wants to do a huge master plan. It's like 25,000 homes is what they want to build out there. But they have something known as the red western Joshua tree, which really does grow almost like a weed, in that it's just, it once it starts, it goes. And their attitude, the Department of Fish and Game, which has no real connection to the legislature in the policies they implement, is that if it exists, you can't build on it. We had that same developer go to the Department of Fish and Game and say, you know what, we can save 95% of these by just moving them. And Department of Fish and Game said, no, we're going to charge you $9,000 per plant that you touch, rather than seeing a way. And if they destroyed them, $9,000. If they removed them, $9,000. Well, it's a mixed priority. So I think what we do need to do is get a lot more alignment in with our departments and our legislators, and get them to really understand what the ultimate goal is here. Should we preserve the red western national Joshua tree? Absolutely. I mean, we got a whole U2 album about it. Of course we need to keep it. But at the same time, we also need to understand there are other alternative ways that we can preserve these plants and find things to do, so that we can also provide the housing for the next generation, for people to be able to live. And that's going to be one big key, is getting those attitudes, or those goals in alignment, so that they can work together. Like I said earlier, there's so much of our land that we haven't built on, that if we can find some ways to achieve both goals mutually, that's going to solve a lot of these problems. The other element to touch on, and Nikki, you nailed it, that whole concept of a third of your income should go to housing. In California, whether you're a renter or a buyer, you're looking at 40 to 50% of your income is where we are. Wow. And on the upper levels, that's not as much of a hit, because you're able to expand out other things. Well, on the lower levels, if you're spending 40% of your income and you can barely afford to get the food on the table, you're not saving for a down payment. And what we need to have is, and my mom used to love this line. She ran an apartment association back when she was alive. She referred to it as the ladder of housing, that you start out kind of like you were saying, Danny, at a one level, and eventually you get past those Formica countertops that we grew up with in our dorms, and didn't have marble and whatnot.
Lived in a nice dorm.
You know, you step it up. You go into an apartment, you go into a nicer apartment, you save up, you put down a brand new, you put down for a brand new home, you buy into that house. That house, you got to fix it up. Then you move up and up and up. And that affordability needs to extend all along that ladder.
Those are good comments. And I've got to say this, Lawrence and Danny, it must have been music to your ears to hear Chip say master plan community. So that has me wondering, what type of environmental concerns or issues have you noticed with builders in the Texas region? I mean, that's very interesting about the Joshua tree in California. What are we looking at here in terms of environmental concerns impacting the ability to build master plan communities in Texas?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I do have to ask Chip, would you say that those seeking affordable housing still haven't found what they're looking for?
Oh, you did not just go there. That was,
Yes. So
Well,
that,
they
All
may
right, good
still
night.
exist
Yeah.
out there,
Oh,
but
that was
probably on a
good.
street that has no name.
yes, yes.
Oh,
We've
that was
got dad jokes, ladies and gentlemen, dad jokes. No, seriously, to answer your question though, Kenya, in that Yeah, in the Texas markets, there are a wide variety of environmental issues that are being considered, both from a sort of climate change and weather safety standpoint, flooding, hurricanes, things of that nature. And then more in the central part of Texas than maybe down here in the Gulf Coast, we've got similar concerns around preservation of different species, both plants and endangered species animals. And so, I don't think that discussion is quite as prevalent necessarily, maybe in Texas in the middle part of the country as it may be in California, but those are definitely considerations that are contemplated. And I think we'll increasingly see in the Houston region more and more regional level planning around safety from weather events and
Right.
flooding.
That's a whole nother conversation that we're all living through in Texas right now. You guys, weather
Yes.
events seem to be more common than not. And that's probably a conversation for another time. So let's take this back to New York, where Nikki, the rent is too damn high. Y'all remember that meme out a few years ago about the rent being too damn high? It's still high. How are skyrocketing
It's-
rents and upfront costs impacting affordability for New Yorkers, Nikki?
It's still high. There was an interesting study recently that said that I think tech workers who generally have an average salary that's higher than your overall New York City average salary could afford 1 in 3 rentals,
Wow.
which is, pretty extraordinary. I think the median rent jumped up about 9% over the last year, which I think is around 3475, which is an extraordinarily high number. And keep in mind that here in New York, most landlords seek for a prospective tenant to earn at least 40 times the monthly rent as their annual salary. So that is just an astronomical number. And I think another thing that people have to think about is people often think of New York, I want to live in the center of Manhattan. New York City has 5 boroughs. It has 5 boroughs. There are housing opportunities and pricing in the various boroughs. And it's often a process of getting people to rethink what they think their life is going to be like in New York City. There is a development that's going up right now in Mott Haven in the Bronx that's very highly amenitized. Maybe you don't want a doorman building. Maybe you want to live in a walk-up. Maybe you can live in a building with an elevator. Maybe you can live a few blocks further from the subway. All of these things have an impact on your commute and your life and everything else, but it's thinking of the larger option. Is otherwise you are ending up, I think in New York, the stat is something like 50% of people's annual income is going to their rentals. In some cases, 60%. That is insane. And it's not just about saving for a down payment. It's about just stability.
Mhm.
Not having the stability. What happens if you lose your job? What happens if you get sick? What happens if you are injured? There are many people who are just one incident away from being unhoused.
And that's scary. And that has
that's a really scary thing for people. And it's a conversation that we're not having often enough about the actual realities of the cost of housing, whether you are a renter or an owner. You may live, I have clients who are in New York and they rent their homes, but they own property in other parts of the country. So home ownership, it's not just about owning the place that you live in all the time. You may choose to buy a condo in a different part of the country or a single family home or a townhome. There are all of these conversations to be had.
What's interesting about what you've just discussed is the impact of working from home. So let's take us back a few years, right, to the pandemic, when people were fleeing New York and most major metros because of the ability to work anywhere. What kind of impact are you seeing with people either returning to the city right now And or what did you see when people were leaving the city? And where
So
does
a
it
lot of people, a lot of people that left the city during the pandemic, I think, fell into a couple of different scenarios. New York often has people who they live with roommates. So if you were suddenly going to have to be in an apartment in a small confined space with two people, let's say hypothetically, that you were not related to, maybe you might make a change. There were also people who maybe were a year or 3 years out from deciding to leave the city because maybe they were forming households, having children, and would not be able to stay and afford that. So a lot of people accelerated that timeline, frankly. And I think some people, because they thought they would never have to come back into the office, went further and further and further out. There have been incredible stories and TikTok videos of people documenting their super commutes, where they are commuting across various states to come in to work because it's cheaper for them to fly or take the train once every 2 weeks or once a week than it is to rent an apartment here. Like, that is just mind-boggling that people are doing that. And I have seen people come back. I've seen people make decisions that they aren't coming back. They would rather have a job that is hybrid or remote if it means not coming into the office 3 days a week or 4 days or 5 days. And that also brings with it salary adjustments, because you're not going to make your higher salary that you were making in New York or San Francisco if you have now moved to Des Moines, Iowa.
Right.
Part of the reason why people were earning a lot of these high salaries is because you're in a high cost of living environment. When you're no longer in that high cost of living environment, how does that change? And I think we're now starting to see employers make those adjustments, or say, hey, you have to come back to the city, come back to work. So I think there are lots of different ripple effects to consider.
No, absolutely. And there's some that we didn't anticipate during the pandemic. You know, one of the solutions that we were discussing for your market in particular is repurposing buildings to apartments, or taking commercial space and changing them into apartments.
It's challenging.
It looks like this year there's a record number of those apartments that are being planned from former office buildings. And in your market in particular, it has the most growth planned for the year. What are your thoughts about those conversions? What impact does it have in your market? And does that really take care of the affordability gap, or is that for a select few?
It doesn't really take care of the affordability gap per se. I think it's really going to be for a select part of the population. And we also have a large number of these office buildings that may not be the most suitable to be converted to residential. So now what? And again, if we're in an environment where a tech worker who's earning, 90 grand a year or 100 grand can only afford 1 in 3 rentals, what about everybody else? What about the civil servants? What
Right.
about teachers? Firemen, postal office? What about your essential workers? The
Right.
people that non-essential workers were depending on during the pandemic, where do they live? How can they afford to live in close enough proximity to the areas that they work in? And what is that impact on their lives and their families the further out that they have to go to be able to afford housing and not be spending 60% of their income on their housing costs?
Well, I'd like to open this up to everyone on the panel. You know, what kind of lessons can we learn from high cost markets like California, New York, to help really counter some of the affordability challenges that we have in our markets? You've
More
shared,
public-private partnerships.
that's a good one.
One of the other ones I'd like to throw out there is, rather than one size fits all approaches to the policies around all of this, let's start to target in and help the individuals that really need the help. Nikki, you made an incredibly great comment that, there's a lot of people that are renting in one place and owning in another place. And one of the challenges we've run into with some of the policies out here, because we've implemented statewide rent control, but prior to that, a lot of the cities that had rent control had a lot of people that were living in rent-controlled units for years upon years upon years, but then owned property elsewhere. Now, rent-controlled units are intended to be for people who need the help and need the affordability brought to them. But one of the things that one of our nonprofits out here did in their in studying rent control and the impacts of it is they found out places like Berkeley and Santa Monica and West Hollywood, a lot of these people, up in Berkeley, the professors were the ones in these rent controlled units that had been at that rate since the 70s or 80s. And yet they own a place in Marin or down in Santa Cruz, and that's where they go on the weekends. Well, that's not what the rent control was intended for. It was intended for the people like you identified, Kenya, the individuals, your non-essential workers, or was that you, Nikki, that was pointing that out?
And Nikki.
It may
That
have
was you.
been
That was you. I'm sorry.
essential workers, yeah.
Yeah, the non-essential, but really are essential to our everyday life. It was intended for them. It was intended for those people that aren't making those salaries that a professor at Berkeley is making. So if we start taking a little bit more of a precise effort in trying to identify the people that we're trying to help out. I remember I ran into Airbnb was running into a problem in the city of LA back when I was running the LA Association of Realtors, where all we asked them to do is take rent controlled units off of their platform, because rent controlled units are not intended to be vacation homes. They're intended to be places for people where they can afford to live. And it was a struggle to get them to understand why that would be an issue for us. I mean, those little pieces, those little moves that we can make also allow the other units to maybe pick up the slack a little bit in the rents, so that it becomes more equitable across more places. We talk so much about equity, but yet we're taking it away from everybody every time we put a barrier in between them getting to their next level. So I think that we can be more precise in our efforts to come up with policies that really could affect everybody and improve things for everyone.
Agreed.
Nikki, I'm gonna jump in because you brought up a great point. And of course, the market dynamics are different down here in Houston, Texas. When you talk about, the commute and, your essential workers being able to get to the place, that employs them. In Houston, you'll hear in some of these, rooms, drive to till you qualify, where, these communities are going further and further out. But I think it's also, the employers hold some responsibility in that as well. And I think, some employers have done a great job of bringing the jobs where the essential workers are. There's a community north of Houston, very nice community, the Woodlands, where once upon a time, when I had just actually moved back to this area from Wilmington, Delaware, when I moved to the Woodlands, there were more jobs there than there were people. And so that was, a very ingenious design that, those employers started building campuses in that area. And then the communities were able to develop around them. And so the people that were able to move into that area when, it was a lot more affordable, then benefited off of, some of the now, equity that they're having in their homes once those areas started to build out. So, different discussion, obviously, from Manhattan and New York, but I think some of those same, rules still apply. I think employers can, actually, throw their hat in the ring and say, hey, I don't have to have, the office in this super high concentrated, high cost of living area. Maybe if all of, my potential employees are in, this area, maybe we can move the office, to that area.
No, that's a very good point.
I remember, I want to say maybe 10 or 15 years ago, even some of our government offices were doing that, where there were state offices that were shutting down their New York City locations and moving them further upstate. and giving the people a choice. You can, if you want to move up to Binghamton, quite literally, I'm not exaggerating, you can do that. Your salary will be adjusted by, you know, a particular percentage because you're now no longer in New York City. And some people did take that opportunity, and they would never really have been able to afford to buy something in New York City, but they moved up to Binghamton. They bought, you know, a beautiful property, and actually some of them have made their way back down now that they've retired. So we just have to think differently about what all of the options are. And in some ways, one would think the way that we adjusted to using technology to have asynchronous or distributed workforces, in theory, should be helpful with this in terms of building campuses in other parts of the state and the country that are lower cost.
Absolutely. And I do want to say for just a moment, for those of you who've put some messages in the chat, we're going to get to those at the end of our conversation, but keep the comments and questions coming and we will address those a little bit later. Those are all very great points that you're bringing up, and how nuanced each individual area is when it comes to the affordability conversation. Let's move this into Texas now, to Danny and Lawrence. Share with the audience what Community Builders Advisory Service is all about and how what you do impacts the new home construction market from a data perspective. And that's going to help us kind of drive a few additional questions to talk about the Texas landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, you want to take the lead with that?
Sure. So me and this gentleman worked together for a previous firm for about a decade. And that firm was actually created by who is now one of our advisors and business partners, a guy named Mike Inselman, who actually created the concept of, you know, collecting this housing data for the builders, bankers, and developers. Kenya mentioned earlier that, you know, we kind of live in the, you know, suburban new home, you know, master plan community. And so, you know, I make it sound really scientific, but I'll tell you, every 90 days, we have an army of field researchers that, you know, go out and drive the Houston market and literally drive with plats in hand, every single section of every new home community, and count the houses and document the stage of development of the lots. And we take all that information, it goes onto an online database, and we have a lot of people to subscribe to that. Now, that's kind of the backbone of the business, but really what the business is, and the reason that the company is called Community Builders, is we're in the business of getting all of these really smart people together who are the people that finance these developments, the builders who actually do the construction, and developers. And we do a lot of thought sharing, and then we pass that along. And so I was going to say, you know, the real answer to some of these questions is, you know, and this is an original one, but two heads is better than one, and a threefold card is not easily broken. So, yeah, we try to get people in a room and, you know, bounce some of these ideas off of them and share what's working, what's not. And, you know, that process, I think, is boded well for the Houston market as a whole. Like he said, you know, everybody is facing affordability, but I think, you know, as a whole, Houston, you know, has you know, fought the good fight in trying to, you know, provide shelter for everybody who wants one in one way, shape, or form. So.
No, that's exactly right, Danny. And I'll piggyback off that as well. You know, in addition to us really kind of facilitating those conversations and that engagement and that thought sharing, you know, one way that the data that we collect does, you know, promote development and, you know, really development of more affordable housing is that, you know, even in this market, we do have building companies that are more innovative in their approach to satisfying that and solving for that affordability challenge. Some that are much more innovative than others, and all of them have their new home data collected by us and put into our database. And so when those innovators really do bring to market a new solution, a new, you know, type of floor plan, a new configuration, a new location within the greater metro area in which maybe land is more affordable, which ultimately, among other things, cascades towards a more affordable new home. That data is available to be seen by, you know, all of the other builders and market participants, and have them really think about, well, how can we satisfy that ever increasing need for housing affordability as well, like this other company has.
And I think there's a marketing element in that too, right? You don't know that you want that really cool thing until you see it, until someone creates it. And so I think, when we're having these forums with, these decision makers in the market and everybody goes, well, man, they're doing a great job on that. One day that gives me an idea. Now I can go and put my thoughts together on, not duplicating that, but, benefiting off some of the things we've learned from that builder, that developer, and then, using different ways to innovate. And, I think, ultimately by everybody working together, that does help with the affordability issue.
It's interesting. We always say he who has the data has the gold. And it's interesting how leading with data can help us drive more informed decisions. So Danny, I'm going to toss this one to you. How is data informing decisions to drive affordability with builders and new home construction? And how is that impacting not only Houston and Texas, but the market as a whole?
I think you're right, and you said it. I mean, it's in the data. We never go into an office or go into a room and say, we're the smartest, guys in the market. We have all the answers. The goal is to get the data, to try to look at the trends, to try to, maybe shore up on some gut feelings. And, you're able to test this stuff over time. We've seen the trends. We've seen some projects that have been deployed, and maybe there were great ideas in that time, but markets change, situations change. You talk about COVID, we're able to look at, the long history of data that we've been collecting, ultimately together over a decade. And you match that up with, things that were happening in politics, things were happening with the economy, with COVID. And we're able to, with enough data, now you can anticipate, based on what we've seen in the past, these ebbs and flows. I think getting in front of, some of those anticipated market conditions, using the data to help, prognosticate, because that's really what we do. I remember my first, quarterly briefing, and quarterly briefing is basically when we get the decision makers in the market together once every 90 days and kind of give a state of the union of the Houston housing market. Many moons ago, when I did have hair, anyway,
That's not the fault of the housing market. Let's be very clear. That has nothing to do with this conversation.
I can blame a little bit on it. I can blame it,
Okay.
but no. Lawrence had worked, diligently on his, first time being on that stage, and he came out and said, we believe based on the data that the Houston market will, start X amount of new homes within the next calendar, year. And he was about 30 homes off. And that's very impressive based on the fact that I think we had started somewhere in the neighborhood of, 29,000 homes that year. And so again, not that we're the smartest guys in the room, but if you have enough data and you can see the trend lines and you can start matching this stuff up with what's happening in the market, then I think that's beneficial. And I think, we can use, some of the faults in the past and some of the wins in the past and apply them in the future.
It's interesting because I think you're absolutely right. We're talking about a very specific market, but that is a process that can be plug and played in any area. I'm going to turn this over to you, Lawrence, for a moment. Speaking of data, how can data be leveraged to create build-to-rent solutions that meet specific market needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, there's two pieces of data that can really drive and could really do a better job than they currently are at driving innovation in the BTR space and bringing potentially new and more affordable product in the BTR space. One of those is really understanding the true characteristics of household and individual income in certain areas. So many of the BTR projects that I've looked at, the underwriting really focuses on what a similar mortgage payment would be for a new home in a similar community. And with home prices escalating significantly over the last 3 to 5 years, and currently in the recent past, much higher than recent past normal mortgage rates, your underwriting can, in theory, prove up a pretty darn high monthly rent cost for BTR products. And certainly there's some folks in the market that can afford that. But I always think of housing demand as a triangle, and at the top there's the most affluent, highest income, highest net worth potential residents, and there's some of those. As you go to the base of the triangle, the more moderate income homeowners and home renters of more moderate means, there's a whole lot more of them. And I think that's true of any market, certainly true of this market. And so really understanding the demographics and true income characteristics of an area could begin to drive understanding that could then drive underwriting and support for build-to-rent products that aren't all kind of like attached apartments in this market as well, aren't all delivered to be at the top of the market. So that's one piece of the data. And then the other piece of it kind of parallels what I was saying about how in the for sale side of the house, so to speak, that one or two builders in a given market may really drive innovation on bringing new and more affordable product to the market. And as that data is captured, characteristics about that product that influences other, in this case, home builders to evaluate the opportunity of offering similar or maybe even better housing. Well, I think the same thing can be true in the BTR space as well. As certain players in that space may drive affordability more so than others, and may drive innovation supporting affordability more so than others, having access to data around their performance and their success only increases other companies' interest in doing so.
All right, thank
Offering
you.
similar product.
That makes sense. And then final question for the two of you, if you wouldn't mind both chiming in on this. From the perspective of home builders, how can we address affordability concerns in new construction projects? And then I'll toss that over to Chip and to Nikki, if they'd like to give some input from their perspective.
I would say, it's kind of a repeat of what I said earlier, but the builders working more closely with the developers and, understanding that they're not on the opposite side of the table with this thing. Everybody is trying to reach a common goal. If a developer understands, the needs in the market, understands what the demand is, understands that, it's not a bad word, affordability is not a bad word, and that these things are going to benefit, for example, at the end of the day, these publicly traded builders, even the private builders, the economics a lot of times drive the decision-making. But if we can show, hey, you can actually deploy these homes faster because there's a larger demand, so there's a faster return on investment, even though your margins may be lower because the overall price points are lower. And working with the developers, I think that there's some opportunity there.
No, I would agree. And also, I think a lot of it comes down to analyzing the homes themselves that you're offering. Houston and Texas, like much of the country, and this is probably more relevant for the for sale question than the for rent question. In Houston, Texas, and many parts of the country, the average size of new home has grown exponentially over the last really 20 to 25, even 30 years. I grew up in a 1,300 square foot house, and we only had a second bathroom because my parents added a second bathroom when I was in high school. Couldn't afford it when we were in middle school, by the way. That was solidly middle class at the time, and now in many markets here, certainly that expectation is middle class is a 2,800 square foot 4-bedroom house with those granite countertops. And in this market, we're seeing builders see success in kind of in some ways going back to the old ways, looking at options around new floor plans and home configurations that are even as small as 900, 1,000, 1,500 square feet. And the market is seeing success. They're seeing success in the market with that.
Right.
And I think we'll see more of that as our relative affordability becomes more and more challenged. I tell folks, and this is true, that maybe 10 or 12 years ago, Houston was a market where dual income couples with both working with an income of $200,000 would buy a $250,000 home. And that was a pretty nice house in suburban Houston. Well, now that house is $500,000, which may seem still very affordable relative to other places, but now we're in a position where we need to have the conversation about affordability. And places like Houston for many, many years really kind of simply didn't have to have that conversation to the degree, at least, that more affordability challenged markets have always had to.
Chip, would you like to chime in there? I saw your head nodding.
Yeah, I'm loving what Danny and Lawrence have to say over there. You touched on a lot of things that really stood out to me. One of the ones that really hit me this week was there was a statistician that went through and compared the number of new home starts in North Carolina to California. And there were more new home starts in North Carolina than there were in California last year. That isn't the real story. The real story is that Dallas, the city of Dallas, not the county, I'm not sure which county that is, but not the county, the city itself had more new housing starts than the entire state of California. So it hits exactly what you're talking about, that you can take those stats and find out where those opportunities lie. And I think that that's a great idea. And one thing I'd like to take slightly differently, rather than on the new starts, what incentives are there for property owners to keep their property? And one of the things where we could really find an opportunity for affordability is if the tax system were structured such that it incentivized long-term ownership. One of the largest components of running that property is that mortgage. And if you could keep that mortgage low instead of incentivizing people to trade up or sell or move or refinance on a consistent basis, you would be able to keep that basis lower, which allows that property owner to offer a more affordable product, which is more likely where you're going to find affordability is in existing products that can be kept at a low cost basis to operate. You think about it, new cars, there aren't that many affordable brand new cars, but everybody buys a used car as they make their way up. It's a great similar parallel, because when you add in licensing fees and repair costs and those kinds of things, it's a lot cheaper to repair an old car than it is one of the brand new ones. I mean, I used to know how to work on engines. Now I open my engine and look at it and I have no idea what to do with it. Well, the same is true in housing. When you've got these high-tech things that are going on where you can operate it and turn on and off your heater from far away, what happens when it goes down? Well, that property owner has to go in there and fix it, because the average homeowner doesn't, or renter doesn't know how to work that kind of thing. We need to start thinking a little bit differently about housing and how we finance and incentivize it in order to make that affordability be real, not just on brand new, but on all of the products that are out there.
Love that. Nikki, would you like to weigh in on that?
I was actually very curious for the gentleman in Texas to learn a little bit more about the government and any tax incentives for developers as you are building, and the same thing for existing property owners. And I think that goes back to, there has to be an effective partnership between the public sector and the private sector, and the private sector that brings the knowledge and the data and the expertise to then help the public sector come up with the reasonable policy to support building or maintaining affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. In the for rent space and development space around new apartment complexes, in several of the bigger cities in the state, there have been some level of tax incentives, specifically in some kind of tax investment TERS zone or PID or something like that, some special district that's been created. That has driven some increase in supply. What we see even more so, especially in Danny and I's work world, that ties very closely with what you asked, Nikki, is much, especially in the Houston market, much development. So development of new communities that can include for rent product as a component, as well as a heavy bias towards for sale product, happens actually outside of the city limits, outside of the municipal boundaries of any city, a city or suburb, and instead are in unincorporated portions of the suburban counties that make up the Houston region. And in those areas, what's called a MUD. We talk about MUDs all the time in our office. A municipal utility district is created, and that is essentially a quasi-governmental entity that is founded and formed as a partnership, really, between the developer and, in a way, the future residents. And a quasi-governmental entity is formed that allows for a finance vehicle to reimburse the developers for a portion of the infrastructure costs, the water, sewage, drainage, sometimes even the streets, sometimes even regional park facilities, things of that nature. And so that allows for ultimately more affordable land and lots to be developed, which then, at least incrementally, facilitates more affordable homes being delivered. That's, in this market, that is the overwhelming path forward for new development. In the Houston market in calendar year 2023, we saw around 37,000 new for sale single family home starts in the Houston area, 37,000 or so. And of those, I'm going to go on the record to say probably 35,000 of them happened within a MUD. So it's not a unique thing. It's an extremely common thing here, but that at a kind of macro level has supported the kind of volume that has been able to be added each year in terms of both apartments and new and rental homes and new for sale homes that has allowed for supply to be such that we've been able to maintain some level of affordability, even if that level of affordability is decreasing over time.
As much as I would love to continue this conversation, we are almost out of time. Again, it seems like it's never enough time to cover everything, but I did want to work through a few of the comments in the chat. Want to say hello to Amy Dubose from Texas. Texas is well represented today. Pierre from New York had a comment. He said, ultimately, isn't this all supply and demand driven and NIMBYism, which prevents new construction in desirable areas? I think we need more programs like ADUs to open more inventory and opportunities. And Pierre, I think you are absolutely right. Let's see, we have a comment from Lauren Wilkins. Great discussion so far. Wanted to mention that I don't think we can fully talk about housing accessibility, affordability, without talking about climate change. For example, forest fires, floods, etc., are greatly affecting accessibility. While affordability is important, I think we have to be careful to build in ethical areas when you consider these areas may not be safe to live in the near future. There's so many things that we could discuss from California to Texas and New York about environmental issues and how that is impacting where people are living. Let's not talk about insurance. I mean, there's so many pieces to this, right? That impact that. Lots of great comments here. We really appreciate your comments and for your engagement today. We're going to wrap up right now. So for closing thoughts, I'd like to ask each panelist to let us know or leave the audience with some information and some final thoughts. And Chip, we'll start with you.
Sure. And yeah, great comments, everybody. I learned a lot here. And, kind of a little bit to Pierre's point. Yeah, it is supply and demand, but it's also constricted by local government. So if I can be the policy nerd for 1 minute, spend more time talking to your city. What's that?
1 minute.
Spend more time talking to your city councils, make them understand why we need more supply, because a lot of them are fighting back, and that's where it's being constrained.
Thanks, Chip. Nikki, what are your final thoughts for the audience?
I would say spend more time digging into the data around your specific areas and go and talk to the elected officials so that they can hear from the professionals in the industry what all of this stuff actually means and how the business actually works, because they often will write things with unintended consequences that actually make things significantly worse.
Good points. Thank you, Nikki. Danny?
No, I'm going to agree 100% with what both Nikki and Chip said. Talk to your local officials, pay attention to the policies that are actually benefiting you, and for the financing and the builders and developers, let's work together to fix a common goal. We're the people that are going to fix this problem.
Thanks, Danny. And Lawrence, what would you like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, as we grapple with housing affordability, both for rental homes and for sale homes, sometimes the answers lie in innovation and new ways to do things. And sometimes the answers lie in looking at the way things were done in the past and seeking opportunities, especially around product types, housing configurations, floor plans, square footage, things like that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. There are several discussions about how to solve the affordability crisis. We touched on a few of those today, but there's so many others that we could have uncovered, just didn't have the time to do it. It's important to recognize that real estate is hyperlocal. What's happening on a national level is good to know. However, the real impact the panelists talked about today happens locally. The housing market faces a perfect storm of rising interest rates, inventory shortages, and increased competition from institutional buyers today. Rising rents in build-to-rent communities are also impacting those who want to buy. While regulatory and zoning changes could provide long-term solutions, it's a slower process when we work with governmental entities. In the meantime, working with a local market expert, a real estate agent, is more important now more than ever. Today was made possible by you, each and every one of you attending, and the support of my Equity Angels co-founder, Kat Winston, and our graphic designer, Derek Stanton. Thank you so much. As a bonus for attending today, we have created a resource guide to learn more about this topic and to do more in your local area. Check the chat before you end the call today for access to a guide that we've put together as a group to provide you more resources to understand more about your role and how you can help the affordability crisis in this country. Thank you again for your time today. It was a pleasure having you and to everyone here, you panelists. Thank you so much, Chip and Nikki, Lawrence, Danny. Thank you for your time, your input, your energy, and your commitment to making a difference in the affordability crisis in our country. That's it for today. We look forward to seeing you on the next Equity Angels webinar. Till then, thank you.